Welcome to Emerging Franchise Brands, the podcast that introduces you to the visionary founders of America's fastest growing franchise opportunities. We'll also hear from industry pros as they share what it really takes to achieve the elusive milestone of 100 plus locations. I am your host, Frank Fiume, founder of I9 Sports, and my 20-year journey from inception to acquisition has given me a unique perspective on how to succeed in franchising. Join me as we welcome today's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. On today's show, I have the co-founder of Just Between Friends and executive coach, Shannon Wilburn. Shannon, it is so great to see you today. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Excited to get the opportunity to talk to you.
Shannon, it's about time I've had you on the show. After all, how many folks that you have connected with in franchising have you had on my show now? We're going to be getting close to like 10, I'm thinking.
I wouldn't be surprised. I'm a fan of the podcast and I have a lot of friends in franchising.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I call it's like 1 degree of Shannon Wilburn is how far away we are with our podcast.
That's funny.
Well, Shannon, let's start off by talking about your franchise journey. First of all, how did franchising find you?
Well, I had a concept called Just Between Friends that it's a children's and maternity consignment concept that we started in Tulsa in 1997. I had no aspirations for this to go national. It wasn't even on my radar, but we were growing it locally and friends and family from around the country were reaching out. This was in the 1900s. They were reaching out and asking, hey, can we do this pop-up event in our city, in our state? And because I did not have a background in business, my degree was elementary education. I had formerly been an elementary school teacher. And they were asking, can we use the name Just Between Friends? And I would, sure, absolutely, why not? And so before I knew it, myself and my business partner had helped 12 people start their own Just Between Friends in 5 different states.
Were you an accidental franchisor then?
Absolutely accidental. I was an accidental entrepreneur turned franchisor. And what happened was I had a mentor of mine, basically, because I was complaining that I was helping all these people and I really didn't have time to continue helping them because I also was a youth minister's wife, which was an unpaid position. And I had 2 kids and I was running my own event and I had a 30-hour-a-week sales job. And I'm like, oh my gosh, all these people are calling me and asking me, how do you do this? How do you do this? How do you do this? And so he said, well, Shannon, are you profitable? And I said, yes. And he said, are the people that you've helped get started, are they profitable? And I said, well, I would guess that they're profitable because they're still doing it. And he said, well, you should franchise. He made it sound so easy. And he said, you just hire an attorney, you create basically an operations manual, all those things you're helping your friends with, you just write it all down and it's a business in a box. And so I left his office, drove to Barnes & Noble, bought the book Franchising for Dummies, read it from cover to cover, talked to my business partner at the time and said, what do you think about this? We started praying about it and then decided, okay, I guess we're going to do this. And really what was happening, and there was a 3-year span from 2000 to 2003 where all of these had started in other states. And what we were doing was we were proving the concept. I did not have any understanding of that methodology. Like there's this thing called proving the concept. But what was happening was we were doing things and had a head start from everyone else and they were learning from us, but honestly, we were learning from them as well. They would have new methods, new innovations in their locations that then we would share with the group. And so when we started franchising, Frank, we had automatic validation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that a lot of emerging brands don't necessarily have if they just start with one location. It's like the founder, I said my business is good. Do you believe me?
Right. They're selling the dream, as we say.
Yes. Yeah. So that's how we started. So all of those people, except 2 of them, right, became our first franchisees.
Oh my goodness. You were under the impression, like so many of us, that franchising is easy.
Yeah.
All you got to do is just get this lawyer, drop this FDD, and just get some operation manuals.
And the money
up.
will start rolling in.
Oh, it'll just start flowing in. You won't even have, you can't even keep up.
That's exactly, I knew it wasn't
downright
even
lie.
that easy. It is a downright lie, totally. Yeah. I'm very thankful he told me about franchising, but he was just speaking from a knowledge that he did not have.
Sure.
You know, he was not you and he was not me. And so he was speaking from very ancillary, anecdotal,
Right.
yeah, you should try this. And I did. And I'm glad I did.
Absolutely. I think it would be great for us to take a moment to kind of address the audience, since I think so many of the audience members are, whether they're emerging founders or people who have not franchised their concept yet, but they're thinking about it.
Yeah.
I think I'd love for us to share together about, while we are both franchisors, founders, to share our true thoughts about franchising your business, that it's not for everybody. And I don't know about you, but I'm not like pro franchising. I'm pro business. And I think franchising is just one way of expanding your business. But clearly it's not the only way to do it. And I don't think everybody should franchise. What are your thoughts on that, Shannon?
I agree. 100%. I definitely think it's not for everyone. And honestly, when I meet people that I don't feel like it is going to be a good decision for them, I tell them that, because it is, I've had multiple friends of mine in franchising that have failed, and it's really hard to see what it does to their families. It's very hard to see what it does to their finances, and so it's absolutely not for everyone. It's absolutely a huge decision. You know, I look back on my own path into franchising and I'm like, if I were to go back and give my 20 or 33-year-old self advice, I would say don't do it.
Really? Okay.
Well, at that time, our concept, of course, now I have 20 years in franchising. Our concept, really, we did not have things nailed down enough to franchise. And our profitability was not enough to franchise. And of course, we've innovated and pivoted over the last 20 years to now our franchisees do well.
Right.
But we also have some franchisees that don't do well. We have some that are not doing well at all. But we also have some that are killing it, you know. I mean, it is not for the faint of heart. My attorney told me a long time ago, she said, Shannon, you make a great franchisor because you could teach kindergarten. And I'm like, what do you mean by this? And she said, you know how to encourage and be the cheerleader and motivate people and influence people to move forward and go after their goals. And you know how to do that within an encouraging way, but you also know how to spank someone in love. You know, and no disrespect to franchisees, but there are some franchise owners that they probably should not have become a franchisee.
Sure. And those folks are there. I know it comes in a few different flavors, but one would be somebody who's extremely entrepreneurial, for starters.
Correct.
And then you have the exact opposite end of the spectrum, somebody who thinks, well, I bought a franchise, so that's it. I start making money as soon as I open. And it's like, no, the work has literally just begun when you sign the franchise agreement, right?
Right. Yep. David Barr has a saying that he says franchising is a licensing of a business model that produces predictable cash flows to an average franchisee with average intelligence, with average work ethic on an average day. And so founders are not typically average. We're typically entrepreneurial. And I tell my clients, like, you have to make this model so simple and that there's processes in place that the average person who's amazing can follow what you've done and also be able to kind of pivot when the system needs to pivot. And that's hard. It's very special.
It is. Okay. You said the word pivot earlier, and it didn't get past me because I use the word often, as that's one of the reasons why my company survived the early years. And I sense from hearing your story, our paths are very, very similar.
Yeah, I would love to know how you pivoted. Like when people come to you and say, should I franchise? What do you tell them?
Well, I asked them, first of all, why do you want to franchise?
Yeah,
Like,
that's
what's your
good.
reason? I need, if they think it's, the money's going to just start rolling in. No, it's not going to. Obviously, making sure they have enough capital. But I really want to know, like, what is their purpose? What do they think franchising is? When somebody asks me if they should franchise, and I tell them, I try to shock people by telling them, I know you probably think I'm going to sell you on why you should franchise, but you're never going to get that from me. That's not who I am. Just because
Yeah.
I did it doesn't mean, it's right for you. In fact, I think a lot of my struggles early on was because I was in this mode where, okay, I'm the franchisor, you're new into the system, I need to train you and give you all of my knowledge. And I made it almost like a one-way conversation. And then I had to realize, though, after a period of time, wait a minute, I really need to listen more to the front line of my franchisees who are listening to the customers. And it needs to be really a two-way communication. I think some entrepreneurs will have a problem with that. And I think I did early on. I was also in my early 30s too when I franchised. So I don't know if my brain was fully developed back then. I don't know. But
We all
you
learn those
pivoted
lessons.
though. You survived because you pivoted.
Yeah.
So you had the willingness and the ability to see something and see what wasn't working. Would you share some examples of how you pivoted early on that allowed you to survive and be here to this day with a smile on your face about
Yeah.
franchising?
Yeah. Um, well, I've always felt like I'm not the smartest person in the room. And so I think going into your franchise journey, knowing that if you're the smartest person in the room, then there's probably an issue. And so I tried to surround myself with people who were smarter than I was, that had strengths in areas where I had weaknesses. And a lot of those people would point out areas where we needed to pivot and where we needed to. I'm confident that the only reason why Just Between Friends was able to grow to the level it was is because I surrounded myself with smart people and also was willing to take advice from them. Yes, did I have the final say? Yes, I had the final say if I wanted it, right? And sometimes you don't, you're like, make the decision, please.
Right.
But one of the things that I did was I put someone on my right side who I call her my no person. When I'm like, let's go, because I'm an irrational optimistic person, irrationally optimistic. And when I'm like, we can do it. And
Right.
she's over there going, Shannon, let's have some realism. And she would bring me down to reality. And a lot of times I would need to hear that. She calls it, she called my syndrome head in the sanditis. You've got head in the sanditis. And I'd be like, okay, when she says that,
Right.
I know I need to kind of relook at something. And so, man, I mean, nothing in particular is coming. I will say one of the things that we did pivoting was our split on consignment was 70-30 initially. That's how we went to market. That's when we started selling franchises. We would do 30% would go to the corporate entity. It's consignment, right? We're not retail resale. We are not buying the inventory. We never own the inventory. And so the split was 30% to the franchisee of the sales, and 70% goes back into the hands of the pockets of the people who are bringing the items.
Sure.
And so if something sells for $10, the consignor, the family, got 70% of that, $7, and the franchisee got 30%. So over time, we realized that's not enough. It's not enough to make it worth it for our franchisees to have the profitability that they need to have. And so we changed that over time. It was scary. It was hard. It was like, oh my gosh, are all of our customers going to leave? We're changing our pricing model by 10%.
Right.
And
Right.
no, it
They
did not.
didn't bat an eye.
No, they didn't bat an eye.
So that's interesting because Shannon, what I found the same issues in my company where we wanted to make changes, like we wanted to raise prices because our franchisees, first of all, we knew we had to break this quote unquote $100 barrier, the triple digit barrier for kids to play in youth sports. We had to make sure it was profitable enough for our franchisees, and our franchisees were scared to death. I think that a lot of the issues that we have as as entrepreneurs is what's between our ears. It's in our head.
Absolutely.
Like we
Yep.
don't have the market data to prove or disprove that this is a good or a bad decision. But we hear these numbers, or just artificially these numbers scare us into, can we do it? Are customers going to leave like you had that? Or are people not going to join my leagues because I'm not $99? It's going to be $125. Like people didn't even care.
Yes. Yeah.
Our growth exploded. Your business, I imagine, they didn't even bat an eye, right?
Yeah. Well, it made it worth it for the franchisees, which meant they were going to do a good job for their community. It's interesting. I was recently watching the college game day, the Texas and Texas A&M game, and I asked my husband. I said, "How many people does that stadium hold?" And he said, "I think it holds like 108,000." I was like, "Just Between Friends last year helped 100,000 consigners." I said,
Wow.
That is." For every consigner, there's a family of 3 or 4 behind them at least. And like looking at that stadium, it was mind-boggling to say those are not even just the shoppers. Those are the families that made money because our brand exists. Right. And if just multiplying it out in this ridiculous way to all of the shoppers and then everyone it touches, it feels really good to want to, as the franchisor. I know you will absolutely, this will resonate with you too, because you were 100% owner. It's like you feel this huge responsibility for your franchisees to make money, to be satisfied. You also have this huge responsibility to serve the communities where you open a location and then something doesn't go well and it has to close. I would be torn up about that. Like, oh my gosh, we have to close this location. There's, 500 families that have been participating in this event. And like, I have goosebumps just even.
Yeah, I feel like I failed. When somebody fails, I failed.
Yes. Yep.
It's a horrible feeling.
Yes. Yep.
But
franchising.
On the flip side, though, okay, the thing that I did not know about franchising going in, I had no idea of the rippling effect it would have in a positive way. And you just said it yourself, like you could have filled that stadium up. Do you realize, you had no inclination on the amount of people you were going to change their lives for the better? Franchisees, their employees, your customers. It's just, that is the beauty of franchising that we often don't talk about, but it's part of the dream that didn't even enter my mind when I started.
No, mine either. And I will tell you, the huge joy that I get personally is I started this business when my son was 2 years old and my daughter was 1. They're 15 months apart. Well, my son just turned 30. Wow. My daughter is turning 29 in February. And they both shop at Just Between Friends with their families. So my son shops at the Oklahoma City location. My daughter shops at the New Hampshire location. And it's really fun to know something that I started. So talk about the ripple effects. We're in second generation now of people getting to experience the joys of Just Between Friends. So it is absolutely so fun. And one of the things that we did with you were talking about the giving back and how the ripple effects.
Yeah.
One of the things that we did with Just Between Friends is when I would go talk to the franchisees. So in the very beginning, I handled franchise development and then hired someone to do franchise development. And I would come in for our version of Discovery Day and I would come to the training. After they signed, they said, okay, co-founder Shannon, come in and we want you to talk to the franchisees. So did you do this?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I did Discovery Day and then I loved coming in for training. I would normally come in on day 1 of training.
Yeah. And I come in at the end now.
Okay.
That they bring me in at the very end. And there is a book that we bought all of our franchisees. It's called The Goger. Have you heard of this?
Yeah. Yes, I have.
And
that's a great book.
Oh my gosh, it's awesome. So part of our concept is we have a giving back portion of our concept. So it's like consigners make money, consigners or sellers make money, shoppers save money. And then we have a third component, the third leg of the stool, which is the giving back portion. So everyone works with a nonprofit. And so we want to try and get our franchisees into that mode of it's not just about the money. Anyway, it's a great book. We give it away and
yeah, it's part of the business that none of us really think about when we're first getting in. We're just thinking about, I want to be successful. I want to make other people successful. We don't even think about the impact, which is the legacy part of it.
Yeah.
And when we look back and we're old, and hopefully we'll be able to look back and say, wow, we really made a difference in people's lives, far grander than we ever expected. To me, there is nothing better than that.
I agree. So many positive things coming out of it for so many people. You just have to make sure that you have the right counsel, you have the right people standing beside you to help you succeed.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And through those different stages of franchising, I do want to ask you, since you and I have a lot in common, one of the things that we have a lot in common in today's world for us is that we both love helping emerging founders.
Yes.
And so I think we need to take a little bit of time to talk about that on, you do a lot of executive coaching, individual with founders. I'd love to get your take on, what do you think it really takes for an emerging founder to succeed and break through from emerging to get to established? Because so many franchisors, they stall out. They stall out in that emerging phase. It's tough. That I call it, it's like the teen years is really what it is. What have you found in your coaching?
Well, I know that I think you've probably shared this on your podcast, but I think it's like 84% of franchises do not reach that 100 mark.
Right.
And I was looking at the Franchise Times 400 list and looking to see, okay, how many of those have over 100 locations? And, there's some that don't have 100. There's many in there that don't have 100 locations, but system-wide sales, they are showing up on this list because that's the measure that Franchise Times is using.
Sure.
But I think it is difficult. So I think if I were giving my younger self advice, I would say, first off, you are not in the business of children's consignment. You are, or sports programs. You are in the business of franchising, which anytime someone asks me what I do, I'm like, I'm a franchisor of the children's concept, Just Between Friends. I'm like, oh, I know, Just Between Friends. And then they think I'm a franchisee.
Of course.
And so I would explain it is, no, I am there to make sure to sell franchises, to build the brand equity, to make sure my franchisees are profitable and highly satisfied, and help them with legal, legislative, operations, marketing, all of the things, technology, all of those things. And so if I were to give my younger self advice, I would say you have to really have a focus. And that's part of my story is I held on to my Tulsa location, which was doing well, honestly, which was cash flowing my franchise.
Smart.
I held on to it for a really long time, probably too long. And in that process, lost focus because my local franchise was doing very, very well. Mm-hmm. And so because we're a seasonal business, we have events like in the spring and events in the fall. And so when the event would come around, I would start focusing on the event rather than focusing on my franchisees. And 2009, our goal was to sell 10 franchises a year. In 2009, we sold 30. And in 2010, we almost went bankrupt because we didn't have the capital to support those franchisees. Mm-hmm. And I was also focusing on my sale versus focusing on my franchisees. So, 2011, we reorganized the company. My co-founder took the Tulsa location, and she took it as her 100% business, and I took the franchise system as my 100% business there. That way I was able to focus on franchising, focusing on growing the locations, growing the people who lead the locations, and talking to vendors and figuring out, okay, what's not been on my radar because I haven't made time to have vendor conversations and supplier conversations because I wasn't innovating because I didn't have time. So that's one thing. The other thing is to make sure that I know this takes time, but be very strategic about your hires. And I had this super flat organizational structure for way too long. It was me and then everyone else, and everyone reported to me. I was the bottleneck. And until I figured that out in a really hard way, by the way, I was like, okay, we have to fix this, and I have to replicate myself in others. And so how can I do that? And so over the course of probably 4 or 5 years, we added layers in our organizational structure, and it took a while. One of the most I have 2 things I will say were transformational in our growth. One was adding an advisory board. Back to, you don't know what you don't know, and you're never going to know everything. And so surround yourself with people who have gifts and skills in areas where you don't. I have this, JBF has this amazing advisory board now. Mary Thompson, Jay Duke, Josh Wall, John Francis, Ryan Allen. I mean, it's just, and if you don't know who those people are, look them up, because you need to know these people. But they're amazing. And then the other thing was we implemented EOS. Those are if I would go back and do things differently, I would do some of those things way earlier. Which
for people like you and I, EOS is really important, because as more of the visionary entrepreneur, we're coming up with ideas and having our team figure out how they're going to implement it.
Yep.
And drive them crazy. That's why you had the no person.
Yep. My no person became my implementer. I mean, my integrator.
Your integrator, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And did a fabulous job.
Do you think by you implementing EOS and really having systems and processes in place, how do you think it impacted your ability then to sell your company, right? Because what year was that, by the way?
Yeah, we sold in December of 22,
okay.
And I'm going to call it a non-traditional sale, because we actually were the case study at the annual leadership conference last year at IFA.
Oh, wow.
And they did a whole case study on how we sold, and they gave the audience like bits and pieces about our story and our history, and what would, how do you think this kind of ended up? And most of the people in the room thought we sold to private equity, but I actually sold to my largest multi-unit franchisee, and it has been awesome, but definitely not the traditional way to sell a franchise. I think most people go to market and bring on private equity, or, I know you used an ESOP initially.
Right.
So, and you asked me a question. I already forgot the question. I started thinking about how I made an exit.
My question was, and maybe it really didn't have much of an impact, because by selling to your multi-unit franchisee, it was somebody that already had the knowledge of the business. But I was curious because you took time to implement EOS, how that impacted the sale or your ability to sell, because now you had real processes in place, right?
Yep. And, that was one of the things that I felt like was very strategic from I want to sell one day, because that was absolutely going through my mind when we started implementing EOS, is brands that are run on EOS, private equity knows, or strategic partners know, that if you're running on EOS, you do have those systems and processes figured out. You have accountability built in, you have focus, you have the vision of the founder to, or the CEO to lead the brand. So those things that I think are crucial. We put in a department structure. We did not have a department structure until we went through EOS. So we just had, here's CFO, and here's my marketing person, but we weren't really operating we would have a staff meeting with everyone, which was so bad. I look back, I'm like, what was I doing? I just didn't know. But EOS was transformational in the fact that everyone was focused on, one thing, and there was accountability across departments, and you knew that early on, people would say, I'm in a silo. And I'm like, yeah, because you're the recall specialist. We don't really have to talk to you, you know? And but once we started doing this, and the operations department then included the recall specialist, and there was visibility on what everyone was doing. And so you never, and all the way down to the franchisee level. Like our franchisees then knew, okay, these are the initiatives that we are working on, and EOS calls it rocks. These are the initiatives that we are working on this quarter. And so the franchisees weren't over there thinking corporate's not doing anything.
Right. They knew exactly what you guys were working on.
Yes. And had some input into our franchise advisory council, would have some input like, okay, these are some issues and would you please work on this? And so those became some of our initiatives.
Shannon, what about when you were deciding to sell the company? I'm curious, first of all, what made you decide it was time to sell? Was there a defining moment?
Yes. So Frank, again, this is like me pulling a number out of a hat. This is what I had done years ago. Like, I should probably sell at some point. When should I sell? I'll sell when I'm 57. Why I thought I would sell when I mean, it's silly, like talking about it, but I thought I'll sell when I'm 57. That feels like a good time to sell. And honestly, because I was trying to think strategically, what needs to happen between now and then for me to get the best valuation, to get the multiple that I want, to make sure that, you know, all of my ducks are in a row, all of our contracts are buttoned up, all of, you know, we have good validation, and then thinking about our EBITDA numbers, where does my EBITDA numbers need to be before I go to market. Right. So just thinking about all of those things. Well, that went out the window in 2020. My husband of 30 years at the time contracted COVID, and he had multiple comorbidities. He was the person that when they would say, you know, if you have this or this or this, you get COVID, you better watch out. And he had 2 cancers and 4 autoimmune diseases, and he got COVID in October of 2020. And 3 days later, he was in the hospital, and then he was intubated for 9 days the first time. Then he survived that, intubated, and lived, which there was like a 10% chance once you were intubated of you living. We were like so overjoyed. He had been in the hospital at that time for 26 days. They called me. They said, Shannon, we've moved him to a step-down ICU. You can come see him now, because I wasn't even allowed to be up there. And so I went in, and he had lost 50 pounds. And that night in the step-down ICU, they had to re-intubate him because he was septic, and he had something called DIC. And so I knew at that point he didn't want to be reintubated. And the doctor called me. He said, can I ask your wife? And Mitch, my husband, he was like, I knew when you were going to say to reintubate me. And I was like, yes, I was. Mm-hmm. And so that time he was intubated 9 days and flatlined, but he lived, Frank. He is a walking, talking, living, breathing miracle.
Wow.
And I tell people I was a rock star during that time while he was in the hospital, because I went into leadership mode, and I became Mitch Wilburn's. He's a pastor of a large church, and I became Mitch Wilburn's communicator, and my communication skills went into overdrive. And so I had a purpose while he was sick, but when he came home and was recovering, learning how to, he had lost 50 pounds. So learning how to, he has no strength, and learning how to walk, and he was walking, but just not with a walker. And just going through all that, I went through some depression, and I'm a normally joy-filled person. And so I knew that something was wrong, and that I was not being the leader that I needed to be for my franchisees. And it comes back to what we talked about earlier, that huge responsibility that you feel as the leader of a brand to make sure that your franchisees are getting what they need. And my leadership team had 100% stepped up, but I was like, I'm not well enough to lead. And so I want to appoint a CEO. So I went to my coach and I said, I want to appoint a CEO. And he said, Shannon, you can absolutely do that. Because I was the CEO at the time. He said, but I think you would be doing your company a disservice by doing that. I said, well, what should I do? He said, you should do what you said you were going to do in 2020. And we were going to go through EOS in 2020. He said, you should do EOS. And I was like, he said, do you think you can give it 90 days? And I said, yes. And so in that first 30 days, I got on medicine and was back to my normal happy self, and felt like I was leading again. And we started going through EOS, and that's another reason why I feel like it was transformational. It would help me get out of that funk of where I was, and gave me purpose to an end. And so when we started going through EOS, I'm like, this is amazing. I know where we're going. I have this amazing team. I had hired a president. And so I don't want to sell. I mean, it wasn't.
Yep. Not surprised, but
that year, one of my competitors came and wanted to talk about, merging or an acquisition. And, of course, private equity had been in the picture as, hey, we want to talk to you, just like a lot of brands are just always in conversation with private equity. That was already happening. And, but then my largest multi-unit franchisee came to me and said, I would like to, she said, by the way, she was someone who I was meeting with on a regular basis once a month because she was my largest multi-unit franchisee. And so you want to keep those people close. And at the end of our call, she said, Shannon, I don't know how to bring this up, but if you're ever interested in selling your business, I would be interested. And I was like, She was one of 3 people that I had in my back pocket to possibly sell the company to one day, just because I thought she would make a great leader. And she's highly influential in our brand. Franchisees love her. And she has shown that she can grow something to massive heights. And I mean, she was killing it and still is killing it. And so ultimately it took us 18 months to kind of figure out how that was going to happen. And I wasn't in a hurry and she wasn't really in a hurry either. And so we made it happen.
Wow. Shannon, it sounds to me you really picked the right person. And your story about your husband is just it's inspiring. It's, it must have been so scary back then. You feel like you're going to lose him twice. I'm kind of thinking back to where you were in that time frame of your business, because we talk about franchising and we talk about it on the podcast. We talk about business, but what we don't really talk about is how life happens around us as well. And things happen, and I don't want to say it gets in the way of business, because our family, our lives are much more important than business. But what happens is life happens and our business ends up getting derailed.
Something a coach told me a long time ago, Frank, was your business is meant to serve your life.
Yes, not the other way around.
Yes.
And it was a blessing, obviously, and a miracle that your husband survived.
Yeah.
But I think everything you went through has been nothing short of just phenomenal. And I think that there's something about fate too in all of this.
Yes.
So many things are out of our control. We think we can control everything. We really can't. Anytime we try to control something, life pushes back, I think.
Yeah.
You have to be in flow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, I do a lot of praying for wisdom and revelation. And I'm like, Lord, show me the path.
Yeah.
And it's good to kind of, if you're a faith-filled person, I feel like it's easier to lead when you have faith, because there are so many unknowns that happen. It's absolutely a roller coaster, and you should expect trials as an entrepreneur, as a franchisor. You should expect trials. I feel like all of us could call ourselves the chief problem solvers.
Yeah.
Because that's our role. When you're at the top, you get all the issues that no one else can solve, and they become your issues, and you get to solve them.
Yeah, true. That's true. Shannon, I've enjoyed our conversation here today. We could have done this 2 or 3 parts probably, but I want to be respectful of your time. I want to ask you, what would be the best way for somebody to get a hold of you or to be in touch with you and maybe get some coaching?
Yeah, so I have a website called Shine Executive Coaching, because that's what I do now. I get to help emerging brands through. I'm working with a company called SMB Franchise Advisors, and so we have 17 people on the team. But the easiest way to get a hold of me is through the website Shine Executive Coaching. I'm also on LinkedIn.
Sweet. Great.
Yeah.
I got one last question for you. So I end every podcast with the franchise tip jar. And new for 2025, I have a new question. Now, this is going to be really geared towards talking to a friend who's maybe thinking about becoming a franchisee. So if you had a close friend that said, Shannon, I'm thinking of buying this franchise, what would be a piece of advice maybe you would give them to make sure they're making the right decision? What should they be looking out for?
I gave this advice this morning.
Okay. All right.
To a friend on LinkedIn. He's thinking of retiring in 3 to 5 years, and he's thinking about buying a franchise. I said, do your validation, call other franchisees, see, and not just franchisees who have just started, franchisees who have been doing it for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years if the brand is not emerging, and figure out, like, are you satisfied? Are you profitable? What are the things that are hiding, that no one's talking about? Like, ask those good questions. And we actually made that part of our validation process for our applicants. We will not sell a franchise to them unless they've talked to 3 current franchisees.
Wow, that's great. That's great advice, Shannon. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. It's always great catching up with you.
Yes, thank you, Frank.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fumey, or Emerging Franchise Group LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.